Hello everybody. I would really like to title this particular video, The Beauty of the Judgment of God. Now in my previous videos, I have spoken a lot about how we should do everything we possibly can to stop judgment from breaking out. And of course, the way that I believe that we stop judgment from breaking out is by forgiving the scapegoats that society tries to create. Society is constantly trying to scapegoat, trying to find somebody to take the sins that everybody's guilty of and trying to put it on them. And of course, the only thing that actually does is it brings about judgment. It causes judgment to break out. So, but at the same time, even though I believe that we should stop it at all costs, because I don't like human suffering and I don't like anybody to suffer, I also actually believe that the judgment of God is one of the greatest gifts that is given to any individual, any people, any nation. And I would like to really try to support my thought on that. Especially in a society where people don't want authority, they don't want judgment, they don't want accountability. I think that this is a very good video to make. Now, the example that I would really like to use actually comes from the nation of Israel. And now, Israel is God's very special, most chosen people. And I would really like to contrast what happened to the people of Israel to the people of Esau. And I think that that is one of the very best examples of why judgment is so special and so important and so necessary. So we had two brothers. We had Jacob and Esau. Jacob, who represented the future nation of Israel, who ended up basically through the divine purposes of God, ending up with the blessings and the birthright of Esau, who did not seem to really care that much about that. But Jacob really truly did. And so if you really want to see a contrast with what shows a person to be one of God's special chosen people, you can really look at how God dealt with Jacob and how he dealt with Esau. So if you were to do a Bible study, which I fully recommend, following the line of Jacob and then following the line of Esau, you're going to notice some very interesting things. One of the most interesting things is that Esau ended up with pretty much the same exact blessings as Jacob. Esau was very prosperous, was very blessed, and Esau even had their own promised land. Esau ended up with a mountain region that was very close to Israel, and they did very well. They were very protected. They had it pretty good. They were blessed. They had lots and lots of blessings. They had the same kinds of blessings that Jacob had. There was only one difference. Esau was never enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. Esau never went through the wilderness. And Esau was never dealt with by God in the way that Jacob and his descendants were. And you see that even though there were times where God had to pour out incredible judgment on Israel. I mean, Israel was judged not just through their time of enslavement in Egypt or in the wilderness, but you could say that the times when Babylon came and took them captive into Babylon, this was also a judgment. And you even see that Esau got involved with getting Israel in trouble by any Israelite who was basically caught trying to escape the Babylonians. Esau would capture them and say, "Oh, you missed one. Here you go." So we definitely see that Esau was still in the picture. But here is the interesting thing, that as time went by, Esau more and more and more puttered out. And in fact, the judgments against Esau and the pride of Esau meant the very end of their nation and the very end of their posterity and the very end of their identity as a people. They lost their inheritance on earth. Whereas Jacob, who was spanked by God and chastised by God and judged by God and blessed by God and spanked by God again and blessed by God again, you still see the Jewish people who still has a testimony and still has a witness on this earth, even though thousands of years have gone by. So God kept his promise to Abraham. It was inherited through times until Jacob finally grabbed a hold of it. And so the only conclusion that I can come up with is that the true mark of the blessing of God and God's love on any people, where people can see that they are chosen, where they can see that God has chosen for them to have a posterity on earth and a lasting legacy and a lasting name on this earth, is the severe dealings of God's judgment and his correction. Those people who are never judged and never dealt with and never fiddled with and kind of ignored, blessed by God, but not really dealt with as a son, after a while, their sin catches up with them and they putter out and they completely spaz out and they lose their place on this earth. And I once again want to talk about America. I love America. I love Americans. I love them so much. We as a people, we can really, we can tell people off. We can yell at them. We can really, we can get in people's faces and say, blah, 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 that was bad. But then 2 seconds later, American person is coming to help you if something happens. And I really believe that America as a nation has been built on this sort of strange mixture between the judgment of God and the grace of God. And somehow we have this mix down. And I have tremendous hope for America and Americans, that even some of the most picked on parts of America, or some of the places where we think they're not quite perfect enough, or that they are dropping the ball, especially some of the ways that we look at rednecks or Republicans or people who have voted for Trump or whatever else, that as intense as all those things are and as intense as and extreme as the right is, Americans are going to pull through, and that, all this stuff is brought to light and it's dealt with. And I really, I think it might be a little bit cheesy and stretching it to say that Americans are God's chosen people. But I definitely believe that God's hand is on America, and that the prayers of his people have been heard in God's ears, and that God's love has been seen by the fact that Americans are not perfect. Our nation is not perfect. We have our ups and we have our downs. But God has really blessed us through it all. And he has such a people who have such a heart for him, that I really believe that we're going to pull through. That we're going to pull through the ugliness of cancel culture. And we're going to throw out the idle perfectionism. And we're going to love our police. And we're going to love our men. And we're going to love our authority figures. And we are going to love each other. And there's going to be a great revival, and our churches are going to be dealt with, and we're once again going to have flaming ministers of righteousness behind our pulpits. And I really believe that we're going to pull through. So if you are being judged, if you are going through situations or times or dealings, they can be hard and they can be intense. And sometimes our brains can't even comprehend the purpose. But God has a good purpose behind every single painful moment and every single rough dealing. And it is because he wants to give you a legacy on earth.